Okay, here we go. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this LinkedIn Live with me, Eleanor Mills. I'm the founder of Noon, and Ama Ocansey, who is the head of all things DEI at BNP Paribas UK. Hey, Ama, lovely to see you. Welcome.
Likewise, nice to be here, and thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh no, it's great. It's great to see you. So we're going to be talking today about what I call Queenagers, midlife women in the workplace, and some of the issues that they're facing. And the background for doing this is because my organisation Noon has entered into a partnership with BNP Paribas, whereby we are supporting Queenagers, kind of midlife women within the workforce. Which we're really excited about. We do some of these corporate partnerships, and I went into BNP Paribas for International Women's Day to talk about older women who are often the kind of bit of the DEI jigsaw which kind of get forgotten. So, Amber, tell us a bit about how you see that, and then we'll come on to some of the more kind of topical bits of this kind of in a minute. But why have you chosen BNP Paribas to support this particular cohort? I mean, alongside others, but particularly doing this initiative.
I think, to your point, the older women are never really addressed in the whole gender debate. When you're
Yes.
talking about careers, you're talking about what happens next and how you see women. They're usually talking about a particular type of woman, which, to be fair, it is challenging for them, but they're probably in a better position than other intersectional women. And I
Yes.
think that older women are never really considered because you're sort of seen as either exiting the workforce or you're not really in the sort of the seniority ranks generally. And I see this because I work on the gender pay gap reporting a lot. So it's just a cohort of women that aren't acknowledged. But the reality of it is that we're all living longer, we're all staying in work longer, and we have a lot to contribute. And we have the experience and we have the expertise. And so it's not a cohort that you can afford to ignore. And I think it is being brought on more and more by the conversation about menopause, which has its benefits and its attractions, right? It's almost saying, well, actually, we're seeing women, but we're seeing them because they're at a stage in life where they're erratic or they're not, they're emotional or they're whatnot, which has its negative connotations. But also the positive side of it is that we are having conversations about it. And I always think that the conversation is the beginning of something. It may not address it, it probably won't resolve it, but once you start to have a conversation, then you can see something, and then that can only lead to how do you improve it, how do you better it, or how do you just acknowledge that it exists.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting, because often within the workplace, the cohorts that get addressed, particularly in terms of kind of career progression and that kind of thing, tend to be younger ones. And we know from our
Yeah,
research at Noon that it's often older women can feel kind of a bit sidelined when it comes to the kind of possibility of a promotion, which isn't
yeah,
actually in line with the statistics, because we actually see that 70% of women at 50 plus want to kind of power up their careers.
yeah,
And yet too often companies see them as what one of the women in my groups described as the glide to retirement. And she
yeah,
was really cross about that, because she'd only been made a partner in her early 50s. And as soon as she was 55, she was being told she was on a glide to
yeah.
retirement. And she was like, but I just feel that I'm just kind of getting to my peak. Do you see that too?
And actually, one thing I do think is a really missed trick is that women who are in their 50s, you have time. Essentially, you're probably going to be an empty nester, or there's going to be something life changing that allows you to have more space and actually lean into your career. It's so ironic. The
Exactly.
stage where people are saying focus on your career, that's probably when you're having children, you're sort of getting married, you're doing all the really big stuff. And then moving into your 50s is where you find space. And
Yeah.
so, actually, to your point, that partner, and obviously, I don't know her circumstances, but she's probably got more space now to focus on her career. And also you've got more maturity and experience, right? You're sort of more comfortable, you know what you're doing, you understand how office dynamics works. So it's a real kind of, I think it's a superpower moment, because all these things combine, which means you can really lean in. But yet,
Mm.
unfortunately, people don't see that. It's the
Yeah.
reverse, where it's like, well, actually they're older, so how do we get them out?
No, I agree. I think it's really interesting, and I think that we started off talking about living longer, and in the 100-year
Mm,
life many of us are going to live now, we're all going to have to keep working longer. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not going to get a pension till I'm 67 or 68. I'm only 55. And we see many women within our Noon community who are, exactly as you say, they have more space in their lives because if they have had children, those children are kind of grown up. My girls are both off at university. But we also have about 30% of this generation who haven't had children in this kind of cohort. So they've got time, they've still got energy. The fact that our health spans are increasing as well as our lifespans means that there is a kind of opportunity to keep working. And also, if we're particularly for women, because we live longer than men, we're going to need pensions and the financial support to keep us going as we live longer. So it's a really massive problem for women. I think that there are so few there seem to be so few companies actually looking at us and thinking about us in terms of a kind of cohort who have got a lot to offer. What do you see within the kind of corporate world when it comes to kind of older women? Have you seen many kind of slightly fall by the wayside?
I think people make definite choices in their 50s, right?
Yeah.
So I think when you're younger, you have got huge financial commitments, whatever that looks like. And as you get older, you sort of think, well, actually, A, have I got enough money? B, you probably reach a stage of your career where you think, am I really done with this? And C, you're braver because you sort of think, I've survived, I've survived all of this stuff. So actually, I can go it alone. I can have a portfolio career. I can change careers. And so I think that women are often braver in that stage. But I think where it does kind of clip your wings a bit is that in terms of upskilling, in terms of transitioning into different roles, people don't necessarily believe that, or they don't encourage that. So you've often got this situation where people are sort of trapped birds because they're thinking, actually, I can fly. But organizations are sort of saying, well, no, we're not looking at you in that way. We're considering what's coming. And I can see why they do that, because younger people are, I call it low-hanging fruit, right? They're keen, they're young, they're ready to learn, they're malleable. And so you can see why. And also they're easier to see. And I say that in terms of actual data, in terms of seeing where people are, where they want to go. Whereas older women, you're sort of stratified in the organization, you're in different areas, you have different interests, you have different skill sets. And so it's just a very wider group of people to try and support, to try and address. And unfortunately, resources and time mean that it is easier to look at the up and coming generation rather than manage and upskill the existing or the experienced generation.
Yeah, and how do we, I mean, I think that's really true, but how do we change that? How do we begin to, because I feel like I've been involved in a conversation kind of for the last 5 years, which is about how do we get organizations and the culture more broadly to realize that as we live longer, actually 50 is only halfway through. It's why I call my organization Noon. It's only lunchtime. And that we need to kind of keep kind of powering up and seeing these people as, seeing women at this point as worthy of kind of, promotions or kind of training, or kind of thinking about their progression rather than feeling they're at the end of their kind of working lives. How do we begin to kind of turn the kind of juggernauts of those kind of huge organizations round, so they begin to see and recognize that maybe a woman of 50's got another kind of 15, 20 working years?
I think this is when it's also an individual thing, right? So I think there's a bigger conversation about careers. I think we have to redefine careers. I discovered this concept of the squiggly career a few years ago, and I thought that absolutely makes sense. So I think that whole conversation about careers shouldn't be the beginning, the middle, and the end. It should be, well, actually, reinvention, upskilling, being open to trying new things. And so people should kind of see their careers as, what's my purpose, right? How am I contributing to society, rather than I'm a lawyer and this is what I'm going to do until I leave. It's okay, I'm a lawyer now, but how do I upskill? So I do think that the onus has to be on individuals. But what I also think organizations can do is that they can support that. So all the conversations about how do more experienced women contribute to the organization? How do we support them? How do we offer training? How do we help them transition into different roles? I think all those things have to happen collectively. And I also
Yeah.
think there's an onus on senior women to really set examples. And I think some people sort of say, oh, well, I'm not a role model. I didn't opt for that. You don't, if you're a senior, you're a successful woman and you're in a career, you are a role model.
Yes,
And
whether you like it or not.
yeah, exactly. And you should be an ally, you should be a sponsor, and you should be an advocate. And I think if you occupy that space, you owe it to everybody else, not only to play it forward, but also to amplify that voice and to amplify that strength and that positivity with experience, confidence. And also, like I have this conversation with my son a lot, who's 18, and we talk about sort of AI and how it's going to sort of take over jobs and what does this look like. And I always think that I would be very scared if I was coming into the profession now, but I'm not so worried now. And I love AI. But the conversation about judgment, the conversation about nuance, the conversation about thinking, well, actually, it's told me this, but I've seen this, and this is this is how this works. That can't be replaced. Of course, it can do the sort of the repetitive low stuff, but the actual nuance, the confidence, the refinement, the judgment calls, the persuasion, the seeing what the problems are, the joining the dots, that comes with experience.
Yeah, I
And
think that
so,
that's really true. And there's quite a lot of research now showing that. I was reading something about Ford in America, who had got rid of a lot of their senior technicians because they said the AI was going to do the problem solving for them, and they've had to rehire them all because they actually they can't. They needed a human being who had a mixture of experience, judgment, a kind of intuition about what was going wrong, and an ability to join the dots. And I wrote an article recently, actually, for the Independent about how the kind of bigger analytical skills and the experience allows us as older workers to actually realize that that there's something going on and to have a solution. So I think you're right that I mean, certainly looking at my own kids who are kind of Gen Zs coming into the workforce,
yeah.
I think that a lot of those kind of low-hanging fruit jobs are being replaced by the AI. I feel a bit more hopeful for those of us who've kind of had experience, because I think that we can see the hallucinations within the machine, and I certainly can do that. Oh dear, where have you gone? Oh, we have lost Ama briefly. I'm sure she will return. We're here talking about Queenagers, midlife women in the workforce, and what companies can do to change the perceptions of women at this point, and to try and think differently about the kinds of careers that we have and how they could be elongated. One of our former partners was National Grid, and the president there talked about how do we have a conversation about elongating careers for women at this point. Ama Ocansey is the head of DEI at BNP Paribas, and she has been talking about what they're doing there. Hello, here you are back. Sorry, I was just kind of filling in some time. Did your phone go down? Can you hear me?
I've lost sound.
Oh, can you hear me now? Hello?
I can't hear. Sorry, I've
Oh, I
lost
can
sound.
hear you beautifully. Maybe take your headphones out, unplug them. Because I can hear you fine. Can you hear me now without your speakers? I don't think there's anything that's changed. Hang on, let me see.
Some strange reason I've lost.
Jeez. Oh dear. Try again now. Maybe sorry everybody, come out of the
Shall I log out
maybe
and log
come
back
out
in?
of the stream and kind of re-enter kind of completely from the beginning back into the studio. Sorry everyone, we're having a few technical issues. We'll bring Ama back in a second. Yeah, so leave. Yeah, exactly. Hold on. Okay, sorry, we'll have Ama back in a second. She's having a few issues with her sound. She should be coming back and joining us soon. But this is, I mean, this has been a big debate over the weekend in both the Financial Times and the Times have run big articles about how women of 50 plus are having problems getting into the workforce. Is that better?
That's better. Apologies. I had
Great.
to log back in. I don't know what happened. Sorry, the
No, don't worry. I
question.
don't know. Don't worry. That's fine. No, I was just talking about some of the articles over the weekend. There's a quite prominent journalist called Stacey Duguid who has been writing about how at 55 she just hasn't been able to get a job anywhere. That she had applied for, she'd sent out 150 different CVs, and that the algorithm is, she believes, is kind of knocking her out of jobs for which she should be, she should be eligible. She's a highly experienced kind of magazine editor, journalist, and she hasn't been able to get a job doing anything. And she was saying that when she'd gone and spoken to some experts, they were telling her to what she called Botox her CV, so that she only had 8 or 9 years of experience. Because the algorithm was knocking her out because they thought that she was too old. As somebody who's actually in charge of kind of recruitment and kind of diversity for a big bank, are you seeing that in terms of the algorithm? Is that something that you're aware of or you're trying to compensate, trying to stop?
I think, no, I haven't seen that in the sense of when we speak to recruiters. In fact, I think that there's a real kind of want when you're recruiting for senior people to have expertise. So maybe recruiters do that, but we absolutely don't. Because you need that expertise, you need those people to come and join. But I can see how it happens, absolutely, and that's really disheartening. And that term Botox your CV, it's that competition, right? They want somebody sort of junior or less experienced so they can sort of be malleable and support them and sort of grow their career. But the reality of it is that role is probably needed to be executed by somebody who's senior. And that's the thing with AI. Inevitably, I think it's funny. I was having this conversation with early years recruitment a few weeks ago, and I said, "Well, you obviously you must use AI." And they said, "No, actually, we sift through all the CVs because there's stuff that we'll see that we can't program an AI agent to select." So I can understand that there's efficiencies to be made, but it's definitely to the detriment of people who have got more interesting or more mature CVs. And that's
you were talking about squiggly careers, and I think the problem with a lot of the kind of automation is like anybody who's got any kind of a gap in their CV, or has taken some time out for kind of caring responsibilities, or is older. A friend of mine was filling in, who's a very experienced teacher, who's been out of the jobs market for a couple of years, looking after her mother who's been had dementia. And she said that she was getting screened out of everything because she had this career gap, and the whole way the kind of online application process was set up was that you were meant to list every single job that you've had and what you've been doing with every single bit of your time since you left university. Well, that's fine if you're in your like early 20s or something, or since you left school, so you can have a kind of complete timeline for got this qualification, I went here. So like every second is accountable for. And if you don't have that, then you get knocked out. It's seen as a kind of problem. But those of us who are in our 50s, or my friend is 60, she says, there's no way that I can go back to when I left university and kind of fill in exactly what I was doing at every one time. And if you can't do that, then you're being discriminated against by the AI. So I think that is something that people in particularly if you're using a recruiter or you're trying to recruit yourself, I think that more companies need to be aware of what's happening.
I do think that you really do have to inform your recruiters, and I always think that there's a real kind of tendency to want to plug and play. And so for roles that actually we need a senior accounts manager, right? AI, look for CVs that see senior accounts manager, and maybe somebody's coming from another career, another perspective, but their skill sets would make them a very holistic senior accounts manager, and AI won't allow for that. And I think that's the conversation you also need to be having with recruiters, to say, well, actually, I want transferable skills, and actually I'm probably better off with transferable skills because you can kind of learn the job, give yourself a year, but those transferable skills, all that experience that you've had in the past, that's going to benefit the role. And
Yeah.
there's a real conversation and acknowledgement that needs to be had around that, and especially
Yeah,
because it impacts women.
yeah, I think it massively impacts women, and I think it's great that you're thinking about this. And I know actually that French companies that are a lot further along on this kind of age conversation, I think, than many companies here in the UK or in the States. That there's a kind of task force which has been set up to kind of look at longevity as a kind of key
Mm,
business kind of instrument, and how we're going to rethink our kind of work-life balance
yeah.
and workers' kind of career trajectories for the 100-year life. Is that
Yeah.
something? Is that something that you're hearing about within your organisation as a French bank?
We're hearing about it in terms of sort of just the general conversation about
Mm,
initiatives around gender, around sort of supporting women.
mm,
And what does that look like? I think that's something that I would be very interested in speaking to our Paris office about what that looks like. But I think that the whole gender piece has been very prevalent in DNI for years. I would almost argue that that's the most focused area. And now it's evolving to include experienced, mature women, intersectional women. And
yes.
that can only be a good thing, because we have to see that there are all dimensions of gender, not just young
Yeah.
and sort of straight, and kind of a neat little box. Gender comes in all forms, and actually, it's more likely to be intersectional than anything else. So you're
Yeah.
benefiting everyone when you're looking at the different aspects of gender.
Yeah, no, I think that that's really important, and I think that there is this a particular piece at the moment about kind of midlife women, which is I think being often quite misunderstood by organisations. So we're getting you're right. We started off talking about I think the two things here which are really important. One is this idea of the squiggly career and
Mm,
that sense of transferable skills, and that there are all sorts of incredible women out there, you know, like my friend Stacey, who've got a lot to offer,
yeah,
who are being kind of screened out because of the kind of ageism in algorithms. And then also allied to that is the same thing as this is the kind of squiggly careers piece. And I think that when you get an intersection of people who've had some kind of career breaks or a squiggly career, because we know that women's careers tend to be much more, you know, less linear than men's.
yeah,
Um, and actually the fact that we are now kind of 50 and we've probably got another 15 years to work makes us actually really good employees, because we've got the time, we've got the experience, we can cope with the AI, we've all done numerous different kinds of technological kind of change. We
mm,
had to deal with the first computers. My entire working life has been about changing technology, so I think we're quite well
mhm,
equipped for all of that. But somehow none of those realities are kind of coming through when it comes to recruitment. And I think there's a piece about how do we tackle the kind of the gendered ageism and the things which are really ruling these women out, and how does that intersect with menopause start conversation, which
mm,
I think is really important, particularly when it intersects with the kind of with actual health challenges. But I think
mm,
if we're not careful, that menopause conversation can, as you started off by saying, make women see a kind of box of hormones full of brain fog.
yeah,
Actually, that
yeah,
it can be kind of counteractive. And I think there's a danger that the menopause conversation has been very much led by the kind of 25% who have a really terrible time,
yeah.
rather than stressing actually for most women it's okay, and that we go on to kind of flourish afterwards.
Yeah. And I also think that that conversation now is becoming more broader, and it's about women's health. And I
Yeah,
think that's definitely the direction of travel. And the fact that now organizations are looking about at that topic as in it's women's health, it's
yeah,
natural. I mean, I must admit, I cannot recall when I started my career thinking or ever hearing about the menopause. It just
no,
was not.
never.
Yeah, it just wasn't. And now it's something that's discussed, and it's discussed in the context of women's health as well. So
Mm,
I think I said this at the beginning. I, I, I- you can't boil an ocean, and there are lots of things that they're just there's lack of progress, and there's not enough of things happening. But I do think if you want to look at the glass half full, The
Mm,
fact that these conversations are happening, the fact that, for example, we've got a menopause policy at work, right? We
yeah,
have lots of support. We have a menopause sort of cafe where women sort of speak and talk about these things. I think all these things are moving the dialogue along, and all
yeah,
these things are shaping and forming what women should be and how they should show up. And yes, it's slow, but it is evolving. Like I say, menopause when I started, menopause now, it's not people aren't giggling behind their desk or saying
yeah.
inappropriate things. They're sort of thinking, oh right, okay, yes, this is a conversation and this is normal and this is what happens.
Yeah, and I think so. For me, this piece about the kind of queenagers or the midlife women and the other things that they're hitting is beginning to see menopause as part of that midlife collision, because that's certainly what we see with our research. That by 50, over half of women have been through at least 5 of divorce, bereavement, redundancy, menopause, caring for elderly parents, caring for the Gen Zs, some financial
Wow.
problems. I mean,
Yeah.
all of their own health issues, all those things, and understanding that often what is going on in the background of women at this point means that they need a bit of flexibility, that they come with all these
Mm,
incredible transferable
mm,
skills, as we've been discussing, but that we also found in our research that a bit of flexibility was
mm,
15 times more important to women at this point than pure status. And I think you're
mm.
right but by the time we get to 50, if we've been in the working world for kind of 25 years, we might have different kinds of priorities. But that's
Mhm.
also about companies kind of thinking about how they keep kind of older workers in the game for
Yeah,
longer, so how you don't lose those really important kind of skill sets and that kind of institutional memory, and how you
yeah,
adapt to what what queenagers in the workplace might need. So I think it's beginning to see menopause as part of a tranche of things hitting queenagers, and then what do
yeah,
you do as an organization to support them? And that's one of the great things about, I think, our new partnership with BNP Paribas, because we're
yeah.
really beginning to do that.
And I think that psychological safe spaces and community are where you
Mm,
get your strength and where you get your nurturing.
yeah,
So when an organization like Noon, and also I do a women's sort of career review program. If you put
yeah,
women in a psychological safe space and you give them a community, they will talk. Because the reality of it is, we all live our lives thinking it's just me. I'm
yes,
alone. This is what's happening. Oh my gosh, how do I cope? And when you're put in a community and and you kind of realize, oh, actually, I'm not alone. This is happening to a lot of people, and
mm,
there's a lot of sort of shame, or you don't want to be seen as not coping. But having that space, having that discussion, just frees you up. And like I say, it doesn't mean that things will change overnight, but it impacts how you see yourself. And also, once those conversations have been had, once that confidence has been built, then people have to start looking at it. And it's not well, how do we approach this? It's like, well, it's here. And how do we work with it so that people benefit?
yeah. No, I think that's really true, and I do think that there are, it's always a kind of, it's always a bit like snakes and ladders, isn't it? There are kind of bits which are getting better, bits which are getting worse. But I think certainly if we look back, the kind of the tide is that um, people are actually finally talking about women's health in the workplace. It's not
Hmm.
seen as kind of something completely kind of aberrant. And
Yeah,
then part of that conversation is then a conversation about how do we elongate conversations about kind of women's careers and keeping them in there for longer. And I think older men as well. And also with 5 different generations working alongside each other, how do you kind of balance all of those kinds of priorities? And that must be a big thing for you if you're looking at this
yeah.
kind of portfolio across the piece. So what are the other things that are in your in tray?
I think that whole discussion about managing multi-generational workforce is, how do you teach managers to manage those different age groups, right? And what does that look like? And
Yeah.
especially managing careers when people have different aspirations and different sort of expectations. I tend to see that the younger generation are quite ambitious. They're very impatient,
Mm.
and so, as a manager, somebody who's managing that kind of workforce, how do you harness that enthusiasm and then let them still feel as though they have to learn the trade, right? They have to learn the
Yes.
graft. They have to become experienced. But if your expertise is you spent a lot of time on AI, let's have that discussion. How do we harness that? And then also the older generation, the people who started work when we were just living in the world of faxes. How do
Yes.
you marry those two?
Faxes.
And how
Wow.
do you,
Sounds like
I
dinosaurs,
know.
doesn't it?
Exactly. How do you marry those skill sets? So I actually do think the multi-generational workforce is a real sort of challenge that organizations are really having to grapple with. I
Mm,
appreciate technology and all of that is coming through, but I think organizations are built of people. And people are what leads to success and what leads to failure. And so the whole fact that we're living longer, we're working longer, and that we are 5 generations in a workplace, it's really key that organizations learn how to support them individually, but also holistically as well. So you're looking at gender, you're looking at different aspects of gender, you're looking at early careers, the different aspects of early careers, you're looking at sort of disability, the different aspects of that. And how do you manage that holistically so people feel that they're supported? And I think the reality of it is that it's not particularly difficult, right? If you're helping older women, it's not
mm,
just, oh my gosh, this is the one thing we have to do to help them. A lot of the initiatives that you have around helping older women, like allyship, sponsorship, career development, career upskilling, that impacts everyone. So
mm.
I do think that these initiatives should be seen in a broader context, because when you help one, you help others. And it's a better conversation than well, we're only focusing on this and this is all what we're doing, because then of course you marginalize and ostracize others. And the whole part of sort of progress and community is that you bring people along.
Yeah. No, I think that's really interesting, but because I think there can be a sense that kind of that DEI is like kind of lots of different factions who are kind of all, have their own special interests. And I remember
Yeah.
interviewing a wonderful Paralympian who was the head of DEI, I think for Vodafone globally, and she said to
Yeah.
me, "What I'm trying to do is to reduce the barriers to optimum performance for
Mm,
everybody." Whatever
mm,
that is. So whether that's a
yeah.
queenager who's caring for an elderly parent with dementia and a kind of Gen Z, and some of her own menopause stuff, or whether that's somebody who's trying to get into work in a wheelchair and kind of can't get into the office, or somebody
Yeah.
with mental health issues. I mean, whatever it is,
Yeah.
the idea is that they can bring their best self to work and do their best work, and that you're there to kind of try and help them with whatever issues come up. Do you think that that's right?
100%. And I think that's where the dialogue of D&I has been lost, is that people have sort of said, well, actually, you're just targeting particular groups. And that's not fair because I feel that I'm not being seen and my issues aren't being addressed. And that was never the plan. The plan and the strategy is how do you remove barriers and how do you help everyone progress? And so whatever initiatives or whatever thoughts that you're having around strategy, inevitably you have to build initiatives, build platforms in place so that they are transversal and that they help everybody along. And it may be that other people need slightly more attention, Queenagers, because we haven't been seen, and
Yeah.
because we are going through menopause. And so, okay, what does that conversation look like? Okay, maybe that area needs to be focused a bit, but it's never about excluding one in preference for the other. Everybody benefits when you have an inclusive workplace.
And I think also keeping more women within the organization and within the hierarchy is definitely aspirational for the other women coming through. I mean, I think as a young woman within an organization, you want to look up and see not just women, but look at women, see women who you might actually want to be. Because I
Mm,
can remember early in my career kind of looking at some of the sacrifices made by some of the more senior women who were sitting there kind of reading stories to their children, in Canary Wharf Tower, and the kids were like waving goodnight to mummy kind of on the other side of London. I mean, I can remember looking at that and thinking, I don't ever want to be that woman. So it's also about creating role models within organizations where you look up and you go, wow, that looks like a good life. My
yeah,
aspiration is I would like to be like that person. So that
yeah,
for me has always been really important.
absolutely. And I had a similar experience when I was a trainee lawyer, and a very senior female partner gave a talk, and she was very excited because she outsourced everything. And I think she thought that she was inspiring us, and we all just looked at each other and thought, well, actually, I'd quite like to see my kids. I'd quite like to find my own house. I'd quite like to, get to know my husband a bit better. It was just, it was quite, yeah, it was quite scary. And this is the point that I made about, if you're senior and you're female, you are a role model, and that is not an option. And I also
Mm.
think actually we have been helped by COVID, in the sense that that whole
Mhm.
introduction of working from home, I can remember sort of mid-career when I was quite desperate to kind of have more flexibility, just because you have a child and there are things that you need to do,
Yeah,
and you always committed, but it meant if you could leave at 4 so you could collect and do a bit of the school run and then come back and settle in and work in the evening, that just made life more easier. But for some reason, you could never have that conversation. But COVID came along, and then all of a sudden, we were all 100% remote. And then people could have those conversations because they were saying, well, actually, I'm working from home, and this is how I'm going to work. And so coming back, I do worry that this whole conversation, especially around financial services, where the sort of the movement or the approach is, well, you need to be back in the office
yeah.
100% of the time. I think that's quite detrimental. And before I sort of get people saying, well, be realistic, of course there are certain jobs that you need to be in the office, or you need to be in person, right? But
Yeah.
to the extent that there are roles where there is flexibility, I do really think that that supports people who are juggling personal and professional. And that's not just exclusive to women, by the
No,
way. I think so.
no, I think what's really interesting, I don't know if you read it, there was an interesting interview this morning with Andy Burnham, our incoming Prime Minister, who was talking about how his dad had got dementia. It was really sad, saying that his dad doesn't know that he's Prime Minister, even though it was his dad who really turned him onto politics, and saying that he'd
Yeah.
been, sitting with his father kind of at the weekend, and with the rest of his family. But I think that really gets across. It's not just women in their 50s who have got caring responsibilities for elders. It's everybody across the board. And in this generation where most couples work, both parties work, traditionally that kind of elder care has fallen on women, but now it's for everybody, and you can't expect the
It
kind of
is.
woman in a relationship to do that. And while not all of us are parents, all of us, or the real vast majority of us, have parents who are going to have, and so we're going to have some caring responsibilities. So I think also shifting that conversation away from that being a women thing to an
Yeah.
everyone thing is really going to help move the dial.
Absolutely. And it was interesting because I was thinking about all the things that happen when you become a queenager. And one of the things that struck me is that I realized that I was a carer for my mum. My dad passed 20 years ago. But when
Mm,
you're slightly younger, you just think that you're helping them out. So okay, I'm doing the shopping because I'm being a dutiful daughter. I'm being her plus one because, she's alone. But when you actually get older and you think, well, no, actually, I'm making decisions now for her. I'm a
mm.
carer. And I think
Yes.
that shift really does kind of change this, because often you're at the stage, even if you haven't got children, or if you have got children, where they're kind of leaving and you're sort of thinking, oh, okay, I'm sort of that caring responsibility. Yeah,
Yeah, it's
3 a.m. And then,
going.
yeah, exactly. Here we go. And then you realize, oh, but actually, I'm a carer too. And
Yeah,
often you can be that sandwich generation. And even if you're not, that whole inheriting or occupying that space of looking after your parents, psychologically it's quite difficult, right? Because you're used to
mm,
them telling you what to do, and now you realize that you have to look after them. And that's emotional. And I think that's another reason why this stage in life is such an avalanche, um,
yeah,
because there's just a lot of things that are happening that are having to make you reframe and rethink who, what, and your purpose, and who you're here to really support,
yeah. I think that's so true. And I
ultimately.
also think what we see with a lot of the women is that they don't want to farm out the kind of caring duty for a parent. That actually, I think what many of us realize when we're there doing that is that it's a huge privilege to be there with somebody,
Mm,
as they're dying, or to, your parents who've really loved and looked after you. You want to be there to give back. So I think when we see this piece for Queenagers about flexibility being 15 times more important than status, actually what's in that is that sense of wanting to be a good human, you know, and wanting to kind of fulfill what we need to do to the people in our lives who we love and have cared for us, and we want to in turn love and care for them. And I think as a culture, we want to kind of reinforce those kind of good human flourishing kinds of behaviors, and not have jobs which make them harder or more difficult, or where we're kind of judged or kind of put down for things which we should be praising people for.
Yeah. And I also think this is the stage of life where you kind of identify your purpose. You've kind of done the hard graft and this is where you're at. And now you sort of think, well, what am I really here to do? And I think that this was sort of one of the reasons for me for a career change. And also, how do I give back? Because you're often kind of in environments with people who are either the same age as your children or not too far removed, or just you're at a stage in your life where you've seen that all happen before. And also you're thinking, I'm at lunch, and now how do I move towards dinner? And what does dinner look like? And I don't want to use the word legacy, because I think that kind of generates all sorts of kind of prima donna kind of status. But I do think you kind of think, I may not have that much longer. And if I don't have that much longer, especially if you've had experience with illness, what does the next stage of my life look like? What do I leave behind? Who do I benefit? What's my purpose? And having flexibility allows you space.
And I think that that's incredibly important. And I think for organizations to understand all those things impacting on their older employees, and therefore thinking about how they keep them and how that might work, and also how you harness those incredible transferable skills that so many kind of Queenagers bring, and don't knock them out because they've got a kind of gap where they've looked after their elderly mother or their child or whatever. I think all of these conversations are incredibly important in moving us forward to the next stage. But I also think you're right that it's important to see how far we've come. And I think for our generation, we've been at the sharp end of that change all the way through. I remember when I had my first daughter, I was allowed to take 6 months off maternity leave, and by the time I had the second, I was allowed to be off for a year. So that was kind of social progress in real time. And I feel in the same way with the longevity conversation, the goalposts are shifting in real time. And with this conversation around Queenagers and menopause, and how we think about an older workforce who are going to go on working, for a long time, how companies pivot to that. So I agree that there's a lot more to do, but I think the fact that even the very fact that we're having this conversation is kind of proof of some kind of progress.
Yeah. And I also think corporations now acknowledge that they have to be human. I think this whole kind of impression, or this whole kind of approach of this is a business and this is what you're here, and you leave everything outside and you're just here to focus on the work. Everyone acknowledges that cannot be a sustainable business. You have to acknowledge the stages, the challenges, the characters, the strengths, the perspectives. That's how you sustain a business. So I do think the approach, the culture, the thinking is shifting. And of course, there are bad actors and there are bad examples, and things aren't perfect. But I think that general direction of travel is not going to go backwards, regardless of approaches or comments that are made by very big organizations or big characters within, or powerful characters.
Usually
I'm trying to be quite
macho male leaders of banks. Yeah, no, I
exactly.
agree. I
I'm
do
trying
think
to be diplomatic
there's a
here.
shift. The genie's out of the bottle. And I think the very fact that we have a prime minister talking about his father with dementia, and how that's impacted what he wants to do about social care. Hopefully we're moving into a kind of more humane era. I hope so.
Yeah.
Oh,
Absolutely.
Ama, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been brilliant to talk to you about Queenagers and our partnership and what we're doing. And I really appreciate your time and your input. And for all of you out there, I hope you've enjoyed this. And this is Ama Ocansey from BNP Paribas, and I'm Eleanor Mills, the founder of Noon. I hope you found this conversation inspiring. I certainly have. So thanks so much for talking to us, and I will see you soon, and enjoy your day, everybody out there.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Bye.